They called their land Kemet, the Black Land, born of the Nile's fertile silt and guarded by deserts stretching into eternity. Today, we call it ancient Egypt, a civilization that continues to haunt us with its riddles. The pyramids rise from the sands as if frozen in time, colossal markers of ambition, mystery, and genius. To the modern mind, they are monuments. But to the ancients, they were something more, a gateway, a connection between heaven and earth, between mortals and the gods. And here lies the question that refuses to die: how did they do it? The story of Egyptian technology is a paradox. On one hand, we are told of copper chisels, wooden sledges, and ropes. On the other, we confront blocks of granite weighing over 70 tons, lifted and placed with mathematical precision. Were these people truly working with the simplest of tools, or are we staring at the faded fingerprints of something far more advanced? The gift of Thoth. In Egyptian mythology, knowledge was not invented by man, it was gifted by the gods. Thoth, the ibis-headed deity, was the patron of writing, wisdom, and measurement. He was believed to have given language to humans, the art of calculation, and even the secrets of time itself. Every innovation, from the carving of hieroglyphs to the alignment of temples with the stars, was seen not as human achievement but as divine inheritance. This belief, that technology came from beyond, shaped the culture. When Egyptians cut into stone, they did not think of themselves as mere workers. They believed they were reenacting a divine blueprint. Their temples and monuments were replicas of the primordial mound, the first land that rose from the waters of chaos at creation. Every tool, every measurement, every stroke was infused with ritual purpose. But what if the myths are more than metaphors? Could they be half-remembered accounts of real knowledge, knowledge that came too early, knowledge that still escapes us? The Great Pyramid, a technological riddle. Nothing embodies the mystery more than the Great Pyramid of Giza. For thousands of years, it has stood as the largest stone structure ever built. It is aligned with the cardinal directions to a fraction of a degree, a feat of astronomical and engineering mastery. Its base covers 13 acres, and the blocks, some weighing as much as 40 tons, are fitted so precisely that a sheet of paper can barely slide between them. Mainstream archaeology tells us it was built in about 20 years using tens of thousands of laborers, copper chisels, wooden sledges, and sheer human determination. But this explanation struggles to account for the precision, the logistics, and the sheer volume of stone, over 2 million blocks, each placed with purpose. Alternative theories abound. Some suggest the Egyptians harnessed sound, using resonant frequencies to lift stone. Others imagine a form of lost hydraulics, where water pressure and buoyancy helped move blocks up inclined causeways. There are even speculations of anti-gravity or forgotten energy devices. While many of these ideas remain controversial, one thing is certain: the Egyptians knew things we still don't fully understand. And what if the Great Pyramid was not just a tomb? Recent studies suggest its internal chambers and shafts may have served other purposes, perhaps astronomical, perhaps energetic. Some researchers point to the so-called Queen's Chamber and its mysterious niches, which seem less like burial spaces and more like components of a machine. Could the pyramid have been a giant instrument, a resonator, or even a kind of power plant? The builders and the stars. If Egyptian technology seems otherworldly, perhaps it is because they constantly look to the sky. The pyramids of Giza are aligned not only to the cardinal points but also to the constellation of Orion. To the Egyptians, Orion was the realm of Osiris, lord of the afterlife. The stars were not distant lights but cosmic destinations, and their monuments were designed as launchpads for the soul. Alternative theories abound. Some suggest the Egyptians harnessed sound, using resonant frequencies to lift stone. Others imagine a form of lost hydraulics, where water pressure and buoyancy helped move blocks up inclined causeways. There are even speculations of anti-gravity or forgotten energy devices. While many of these ideas remain controversial, one thing is certain: the Egyptians knew things we still don't fully understand. And what if the Great Pyramid was not just a tomb? Recent studies suggest its internal chambers and shafts may have served other purposes, perhaps astronomical, perhaps energetic. Some researchers point to the so-called Queen's Chamber and its mysterious niches, which seem less like burial spaces and more like components of a machine. Could the pyramid have been a giant instrument, a resonator, or even a kind of power plant? The builders and the stars. If Egyptian technology seems otherworldly, perhaps it is because they constantly look to the sky. The pyramids of Giza are aligned not only to the cardinal points but also to the constellation of Orion. To the Egyptians, Orion was the realm of Osiris, lord of the afterlife. The stars were not distant lights but cosmic destinations, and their monuments were designed as launch pads for the soul. The Temple of Dendra, for example, is famous for its enigmatic carvings, the so-called Dendra light, which some interpret as depictions of electrical devices. While mainstream scholars argue they are symbolic, the possibility that Egyptians experimented with forms of energy remains tantalizing. Water, too, played a role. The Nile was more than a river, it was a power source. The sophisticated irrigation systems of Egypt show an understanding of hydraulics that rivals Roman aqueducts. Some researchers wonder if the flow of water beneath temples and pyramids was harnessed not only for agriculture but also for generating energy, perhaps electrical, perhaps something we have yet to rediscover. A legacy beyond time. What makes the story of Egyptian technology so haunting is that it feels both ancient and futuristic. We look at their monuments and see not only relics but also blueprints, hints that they may have touched knowledge we are only beginning to reclaim. Were they simply masters of ingenuity with the simplest of tools, or inheritors of a forgotten science? Did they discover principles of physics, acoustics, and engineering that were lost in the collapse of their civilization, waiting millennia for us to find again? The Egyptians themselves had no doubt. They believed they were preserving the wisdom of the gods, passing it down through temples, texts, and monuments. They built not only for their own time but for eternity. And in that sense, they succeeded. For here we are, 5,000 years later, still asking the same questions, still marveling at their achievements, still straining to hear the whispers of Thoth in the stone. As the desert winds sweep over the silent pyramids, as the stars rise over the Nile just as they did in the days of Khufu and Ramses, one truth becomes clear: Egypt was not merely a civilization. It was a message. A message carved in stone, encoded in myth, aligned with the heavens. A message that waits for us to decode it. And perhaps the greatest riddle of all is not how they built their world, but why. When we think of ancient Egypt, we imagine monuments, pyramids piercing the sky, temples carved with gods and pharaohs, colossal statues staring across eternity. But hidden beneath the grandeur is a quieter story, the story of mechanisms, inventions, and devices that made Egyptian civilization not just majestic, but possible. This is a story less about towering stone and more about the subtle genius that kept the Nile kingdom alive. It is about water and gears, about medicine and measurement, about the small but profound technologies that turned Egypt into the beating heart of the ancient world. The Nile, engine of a civilization. Egypt was, above all, the gift of the Nile. Without its yearly floods, there would have been no harvest, no cities, no kingdom. But the river was unpredictable, swelling in some years, shrinking in others. To master the Nile was to master survival itself. Here the Egyptians revealed their engineering brilliance. They created vast irrigation networks, canals, dikes, and basins that could channel the floodwaters into fields and store them for the dry months. They developed tools like the shaduf, a simple lever with a counterweight that allowed farmers to lift water from the river and pour it into irrigation channels. Later, they adopted the sakia, a water wheel powered by animals, turning endlessly to raise water for thirsty crops. These may sound like humble devices, but they represent something profound: the transformation of nature into a predictable machine. By harnessing water with mathematics and mechanics, the Egyptians turned chaos into order. And in the temple inscriptions, they attributed these devices not to human ingenuity alone, but again to the gods, to Khnum, the potter who shaped life, or to Hapi, the spirit of the flood. Technology and divinity were inseparable. The calendar and the stars. But irrigation required more than machines. It required prediction. To know when the flood would arrive was as critical as knowing how to store its waters. And here, Egyptian astronomy came into play. Every year, the star Sirius, known to them as Sopdet, would rise just before dawn in midsummer. This heliacal rising coincided with the flooding of the Nile. By watching the skies, Egyptian priests could announce the coming flood, marking the start of the agricultural year. From this observation, they built one of humanity's earliest solar calendars, a system of 365 days divided into 12 months of 30 days each, plus 5 extra epigomenal days. This calendar allowed them not only to manage crops but to synchronize festivals, rituals, and the cycles of temple construction. In essence, the sky became a mechanism, a clockwork of stars and planets that guided the rhythms of the land. The tools of builders. The grand monuments of Egypt were impossible without a toolkit of ingenious instruments. We imagine workers with ropes and wooden mallets, but there was more subtlety at work. The Egyptians used plumb lines for vertical alignment, A-frame levels filled with water for horizontal leveling, and merkits, sighting rods with plumb bobs, to align temples with celestial bodies. With these simple yet precise instruments, they achieved alignments that still astonish modern engineers. Even the act of quarrying stone demanded hidden mechanisms. Blocks were separated from bedrock by cutting channels, inserting wooden wedges, and then soaking them with water. As the wood swelled, the rock cracked free. A simple trick of physics, but one that allowed the extraction of thousands of tons of stone. These were not primitive techniques, they were elegant solutions, tailored to the materials and resources at hand. Medicine, science of the body. Beyond stone and water, the Egyptians also mastered the machinery of the human body. From papyrus scrolls buried in tombs, we have discovered one of the world's earliest medical literatures. The Ebers Papyrus, written around 1550 BCE, describes hundreds of remedies, herbs for digestive problems, honey for wounds, castor oil for skin conditions. The Edwin Smith Papyrus reveals a surprisingly rational approach to trauma and surgery, listing diagnoses, prognoses, and treatments for head injuries, fractures, and dislocations. Here, Egyptian technology enters the realm of biology. They used sutures made of linen, splints for broken bones, and even prosthetic toes and fingers for amputees. They practiced dentistry, trepanation, and antiseptics, centuries before similar practices emerged elsewhere. To them, healing was both spiritual and practical. They invoked the gods, but they also applied honey, moldy bread, and herbs, all of which we now know have antibacterial properties. Their medicine was not guesswork, it was a delicate balance of ritual and empirical knowledge. Electricity before its time. Among the strangest enigmas of Egyptian technology lies in the reliefs at the Temple of Dendera. These carvings depict figures holding what appear to be large glass bulbs, with serpentine filaments inside, connected to a structure resembling a power source. To some, they are symbolic representations of creation and life. To others, they look startlingly like electrical lamps. Could the Egyptians have experimented with forms of electricity? The discovery of the so-called Baghdad battery, in Mesopotamia, a clay jar with a copper cylinder inside, possibly used to generate small currents, suggests that ancient peoples may indeed have stumbled upon electrochemical reactions. If Mesopotamia had such devices, is it unthinkable that Egypt, with its wealth of innovation, may have had something similar? The evidence is thin, and mainstream scholars caution against overinterpretation. Yet the idea lingers, like a spark in the dark, that the ancients may have known more about energy than we assume. Hidden machines of the afterlife. For the Egyptians, technology did not end with life. It continued into death. Their tombs and burial chambers were filled with mechanisms designed to protect, to preserve, and to guide. The great tombs of the Valley of the Kings contain hidden passageways, false doors, and even ancient booby traps, sliding stones and concealed pits meant to deter grave robbers. Some scholars believe these devices were engineered as carefully as the tombs themselves, requiring a knowledge of levers, pulleys, and counterweights. But beyond defense, there was preservation. The process of mummification itself was a technological marvel. By removing organs, drying the body with natron salts, and wrapping it in resins and linens, the Egyptians created a method of preservation so effective that thousands of years later, we can still see the faces of their dead. To them, this was not simply ritual, it was applied science. A machine of chemistry designed to secure immortality. The invisible hand of mathematics. At the core of every Egyptian mechanism was mathematics. Their system of measurement, based on cubits, palms, and fingers, allowed them to build on a colossal scale with consistency. Their geometry was advanced enough to calculate areas of triangles, volumes of cylinders, and even the slope ratios of pyramids. In fact, some scholars argue that the Great Pyramid encodes constants like pi and the golden ratio, though whether by design or coincidence remains debated. What is certain is that Egyptian mathematics was practical, precise, and indispensable. It guided the flow of water, the carving of stone, the alignment of temples, and the healing of bodies. It was the silent machinery behind every visible monument. Technology and religion, a single fabric. Perhaps the most striking difference between Egyptian technology and ours is the way they saw it. To us, technology is secular, a matter of science and engineering. To them, it was sacred. The shadif lifting water was not just a lever, it was the arm of a god. The calendar was not just a tool for farming, it was the rhythm of the cosmos. The act of mummification was not just preservation, it was the transformation of a human into an eternal being. This worldview blurred the line between machine and miracle. Every mechanism was a prayer, every invention a bridge to eternity. And perhaps it is this perspective that allowed them to create things that still baffle us today. Shadows of forgotten devices. As we sift through the sands, we continue to find hints of lost mechanisms. Fragments of gears, strange tools whose purpose is uncertain, cryptic inscriptions that hint at machines now vanished. Each discovery adds to the sense that we are only glimpsing the surface of a deeper technological culture. Were there devices we have not yet found, machines of wood, leather, and bronze that have long since decayed? Were there experiments with sound, energy, and hydraulics that left no clear trace? The silence of the desert does not answer, but it does not deny. The unbroken chain. In the end, the hidden mechanisms of Egypt remind us of a truth, that technology is never separate from culture, belief, and survival. The Egyptians built machines not to conquer nature but to harmonize with it. Their devices were not ends in themselves, but parts of a cosmic order. And in this, they left us more than monuments. They left us a philosophy of technology, one that still challenges us. For we, with our satellites and circuits, are also building machines. But do we remember why? Do we see the cosmos in our inventions, or only profit and progress? The Egyptians remind us that technology can be sacred, that every mechanism can be a bridge between worlds. As the Nile flows on, as the stars still rise over Luxor and Karnak, their hidden machines whisper to us. Not just of what they built, but of how they thought. And perhaps, if we listen closely enough, we will find that their wisdom is not lost at all, but waiting to be rediscovered. The story of ancient Egypt has always been told in fragments, broken statues, half-deciphered texts, eroded temples. We piece together their lives from shards of pottery and walls of hieroglyphs, but the full picture always hovers just out of reach, like the mirage over the desert sands. And yet, when we look closer at their achievements, at their technologies both visible and hidden, we are confronted by a haunting question: what if the story of Egypt is not only about the past, but about the future? The mirror of time. Civilizations rise, flourish, and fade. That is the cycle of history. But Egypt feels different. Unlike many other ancient cultures, Egypt left behind structures so vast, so enduring, that they seem almost immune to time. The Great Pyramid, standing for over 4,500 years, has outlived empires, religions, and revolutions. But perhaps these structures were not just monuments of power. Perhaps they were time capsules, deliberate messages encoded in stone, designed not for their contemporaries, but for us. When we build skyscrapers, satellites, and microchips, we often assume we are the pinnacle of human achievement. Yet when we stare at the pyramids, when we see the geometry encoded in temples, when we read the medical papyri that hint at knowledge lost and rediscovered, we are forced to confront an unsettling idea: maybe we are not pioneers, but inheritors. Rediscovery through modern eyes. Today, technology allows us to probe the mysteries of Egypt in ways the ancients could never have imagined. Infrared scans, ground-penetrating radar, and 3D modeling have revealed hidden chambers within pyramids, secret tunnels beneath the sands, and alignments we once overlooked. CT scans of mummies have unveiled diseases, diets, and surgeries, proving that Egyptian medicine was not superstition but science in its infancy. Chemical analysis of pigments shows mastery of synthetic compounds, long before modern chemistry. Satellite imaging has even revealed lost cities buried beneath the desert, invisible to the naked eye but clear from orbit. In other words, our own technologies are finally catching up to theirs, not in tools, but in perspective. We are beginning to see what they always knew, that the world is a system of interlocking mechanisms, from the flow of water to the movement of stars, from the body's pulse to the heartbeat of the cosmos. Patterns in the stone. Consider this: the pyramids of Giza are aligned with astonishing accuracy to the cardinal points. The layout of the three pyramids mirrors the belt stars of Orion. The Temple of Karnak aligns with the solstices. These were not coincidences, they were deliberate encodings of cosmic order. Now look at our modern world. We launch satellites to track the stars, telescopes to peer into the void, accelerators to smash particles and glimpse creation itself. We, too, are seeking alignment, trying to decode the hidden laws of the universe. Is this not the same quest, written in a different language? The Egyptians used stone and shadow. We use silicon and light. But both speak of the same hunger, to understand our place in the cosmos. The fragility of knowledge. Yet there is another lesson hidden in Egypt: the fragility of knowledge. For all their brilliance, much of their technology vanished with them. We know they practiced advanced medicine, but their surgical tools have largely disappeared. We know they engineered with precision, but the finer details of their methods are lost. We suspect they may have experimented with energy, sound, or hydraulics in ways we can only guess. Why did this knowledge vanish? Wars, invasions, collapses of dynasties, all swept away libraries and laboratories. The Library of Alexandria, though Greek in origin, contained countless Egyptian texts, many of which were destroyed in flames. Knowledge, like any fragile mechanism, can be broken. And here lies the warning for us: we too believe our technology is eternal, that our digital libraries and data centers will last forever. But Egypt reminds us how easily civilization can lose its memory. A few centuries of chaos, and much of what we know could vanish, leaving only ruins for future archaeologists to ponder. The technology of meaning. But perhaps the most profound lesson Egypt gives us is not about machines, but about meaning. Their tools were inseparable from their worldview. Their calendars were not just for planting, they were sacred reflections of cosmic cycles. Their medicine was not only healing, it was preparation for eternity. Their pyramids were not only tombs, they were stairways to the stars. Compare this with our own world. Our machines grow more powerful each year, but their purpose is often fragmented: to profit, to entertain, to accelerate. Rarely do we build with eternity in mind. Rarely do we align our cities with the stars, or embed our devices with cosmic symbolism. Egypt whispers to us across time: technology is not just about what it does. It is about what it means. Return to the origin. What if Egypt was not a beginning, but a reminder? What if their civilization was itself the echo of something older, a lost age of knowledge that they inherited, preserved, and passed down in stone? Many myths speak of Zep Tepi, the first time, when the gods walked among men and laid the foundations of civilization. To mainstream historians, it is myth. To others, it is memory. Modern discoveries have pushed the timeline of human sophistication further back than once believed. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, built over 11,000 years ago, shows that complex architecture existed long before Egypt. Could it be that the Egyptians were not inventing technology from scratch, but carrying forward fragments of a much older science? If so, then we are not the first to rise to this level of knowledge. We may simply be the latest. And like Egypt, our skyscrapers and satellites may one day crumble, leaving behind riddles for another future to solve. Egypt and the future of humanity. And so we arrive at the final paradox. When we look at Egypt, we are looking not only backward, but forward. Their mastery of water, stone, medicine, and astronomy was not just about survival, it was about transcendence. They wanted to escape the limits of mortality, to touch the eternal. Is this not exactly what we pursue today? Through biotechnology, artificial intelligence, and space exploration, we too are striving to overcome death, to reach the stars, to carve our legacy into the universe. Perhaps the Egyptians would look at us with recognition, even approval. For in our search for immortality, we are walking the same path they walked, guided by the same stars. The last question. As the desert winds sweep over the ruins of Thebes, as the pyramids cast their long shadows under the same sun that shone on Khufu and Ramses, one truth emerges: Egypt endures not because of its stone, but because of its message. It tells us that technology and spirit are not separate. That machines can be sacred. That knowledge is fragile but eternal in its cycles. That civilizations rise, fall, and rise again, each rediscovering what the last forgot. And so the question that lingers is not whether the Egyptians were ahead of their time, but whether we are behind ours. Because if Egypt's true gift was to show us the marriage of science and meaning, of mechanism and myth, then perhaps we have not yet caught up. Perhaps we are only now learning to return to the origin. To build not only with power, but with purpose. Not only with speed, but with eternity in mind. Not only with knowledge, but with wisdom. The sands of Egypt wait. The stars above are the same. The message is there, etched in stone. Technology is not just what we make. It is what we become.